we're live. Hi, Norm.
Hello.
How are you going?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Raz?
Good. I'm pumped. Good to see you. It's another opportunity to talk about some of our favorite pieces of literature, things that have
Yeah,
stood the test of time, and things that I encounter on a day to day basis. And yeah, there was one thing that I want to talk to you about today, which was one of my favorite stories, fairy tales. The premise for this is actually that I read a lot of stories to my daughter, and whether you like it or not, you always have to start with the classics in terms of stories. And it's something that really fascinates me is what makes these children's stories, like the one that we're going to talk about today, so enduring that you just want to read it over and over again. And then kids are just so captivated by them. And I wanted to take a case in point today, which is Snow White, and really dissect it a bit with you and understand what makes it so appealing and enduring. How does that sound?
sure. Yeah, absolutely. I haven't read Snow White for ages, but I'm pumped. I'm pumped.
Uh, it seems kind of trivial to talk about these children's stories, but there's something so enduring and so true within these stories that I think we should dive deep into it. For those that don't remember the story of Snow White, I know everybody's seen it, and a lot of people are familiar with the Disney version. So I might mix a bit the Disney version with what is the original, which was collected by the Grimm brothers back in 1812, and this turned out to be this collection of fairy tales from the Grimm brothers, or old tales, ended up being kind of the bestseller of the 19th century. I think at 1900 it was the second most sold book after the Bible. So we're talking about a real bestseller that then became a hit blockbuster with Disney and is today still one of the number one books. So selecting just Snow White out of that, the story of the basically the young girl, born, I think, when the mother pricks her finger and three drops of blood fall into the snow, gives her name, and then the mother perishes at birth. Gets reared and raised by a stepmother, who, in a conflict of vanity and jealousy over beauty, wages basically a whole war against it. And speaking of war these days, if you all might remember the secret room of the stepmother, where she goes and asks the mirror on the wall, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all, only to get herself as an answer until the day when Snow White grows up and starts competing for that number one spot.
So
And
essentially, are you saying that this is a metaphor for the Russian-Ukrainian conflict?
no comment on that, but definitely definitely a rivalry there in terms of beauty. And we all know the story afterwards. She basically, the stepmother, decides to kill Snow White. So she hires this huntsman, sorry, a very Australian term, hunter, to commit the deed in the forest. And Snow White kind of begs for mercy. Now the stepmother had actually asked for the organs, right? Some of the lungs and liver to be delivered to her so that she could eat them. We'll talk about
Yeah,
why
there's
that's
a
the case.
weird cannibal. Yeah, there's a weird cannibal undertone
Just
there.
hold that image for a moment, and then the hunter basically, I think, kills a boar or something and brings that organ to the mother, the stepmother. Now Snow White escapes and then is found by, or enters the home of these seven dwarfs, which we'll get to what they mean in a second. But she finds protection, and she's very, very tidy over there, according to the Disney version, and she helps out a lot until the day when the stepmother finds about her existence again from the mirror, and basically has several attempts at getting rid of her and killing her, ultimately succeeding through a poison apple, through pretending to be an old lady and so on, because she was also a witch.
Yeah, something I'd add is that I believe the queen tried to kill Snow White 3 times. Once through giving her a lace that was too tight, once trying to poison her with a comb, and then the third time with the apple. And this whole thing happened while the dwarfs told Snow White not to let anyone enter into the home, and Snow White still kept doing it. So I feel like Snow White was incredibly gullible at one point.
And that's part of the
Obviously, I'm
kind of
not.
the children's story, right? Don't ever open the door to a stranger, and so
Yeah,
on.
yeah. Obviously, I'm not victim blaming. It's not her fault or anything. But it's just funny that the dwarves told her straight away, like, "Don't open the door," and it's like, "Hey, you're opening the door."
That mercy is basically a sign of weakness as well, and it definitely takes a toll because she dies or seemingly goes into a comatose. And there are several versions of how she comes out of it. Definitely, she there's a prince at one day that either sees her, wants to take her to the palace, or I don't know exactly at what point this happens. But there are two versions here. One is that probably the Disney version is that some some of the helpers of the prince drop the coffin that she was in, and the apple is displaced. And there's another version around a kiss that unlocks basically the spell of the poison. Of course, they fall in love and they live happily ever after. Classic. That's why we're here. But no, that's the story, and the reason why. Just quickly cover that. But there's so much in this, and right? How can you not love the story? How can the story not deliver over and over again with all its variations? Because it has so many archetypes, right? The abusive parent, the rivalry, the feminine rivalry for beauty. Come on, let's face it. This is what it's all about, right? This idea that and there's also the tension between a mother and a daughter. As one rises, the other one falls, and this it's almost like life and death conflict that happens when you're rearing a child, right? A lot of parents may be facing when they have to look after the kids. And then you got the huntsman motif and the mercy, and we'll talk about the cannibalism, and then the dwarfs that represent the resources of the earth, and then Snow White kind of having that human touch, right? That turns a lot of those pure natural resources into something good, which is that dwarf cottage. So many cool things, and of course the betrayal, right, of the mother, and the murder through poisoning, and then revival through a kiss, or through how do you call it? Just lack of attention. But anyway, some form of masculine initiative there, either dumping the coffin, or going for a kiss in all its clumsiness, leads to a revival of the feminine, to put it in more
Sure.
archetypal
Let's
terms.
let's focus on a thing or two. Like, what's your main interest point in this? Because you listed a lot of things there.
Yeah, I mean, all of those things are things that I like. As I touched upon at the beginning, for me, when I read this fairy tale as opposed to other ones, what really fascinates me is that jealousy between the feminine competition, effectively, for what is effectively beauty, right? That's what really stands out, is the jealousy that a mother, even though it's a stepmother, feels this hatred for something that is beautiful and pure, is something that I could never come to terms with.
I think so I read a few interpretations of this. One of them, it's called the ageist interpretation, that as the queen is getting older, she's losing the beauty, and the younger queen, Snow White being the younger queen, is taking over. So it's the idea that the value of a woman is tied to her age and her beauty, right? And then there's another interpretation of it which ties back to the electro complex, which is it's described as the psychosexual competition between the mother and their
Hmm.
daughter for the attention of the father.
Look, I think
So
that
it's
that's absolutely, there's some truth to that, right? I mean, I have a daughter, and well, obviously every situation is specific. But I do feel there's something about the relationship between a father and a daughter that is a precursor to kind of the full development from all points of view, and it does come sometimes at the detriment of a mother. You would see why that relationship would have tension, because it does jeopardize the relationship between the two partners. So there is something very true psychological about that.
or I guess, I mean, if I want to just simplify it and remove all the academic work from it, I could even say that this is just an archetype of child abuse, right?
Yeah, and it's proven that, I mean, out of the people that do get abused, I think the vast majority end up being in situations with step parents, and I think this is a warning around that family that has these kind of variations. So it's not the biological parents. There's something really dangerous, and it's about the danger of the foreign in general, right? Because it appears as a mother, and it appears then disguised as the witch later on, and you're opening the door to the strange to some extent, and there's some danger in there.
To be fair, when I first looked up Snow White just to prepare for this podcast, the first thing that came up on Google was the porn version of Snow White, and after watching about 30 minutes of it,
Okay, so
I
make sure you
not
put your
even the
Google
dwarves.
filter, your parental filter, safe search when you look up
Yes,
the topic.
please do. Anyway, after 30 minutes of watching it, I realized this is not the Snow White we are trying to talk about.
Well, I'm good. I'm glad you've done your research. But
Absolutely.
what do you make of the? Okay, you've opened it up for some of the, yeah, the more the tricky parts of the story, right? Because a lot abuse is definitely one of them. It has some connotations around, right, pedophilia, or that even the tension between the girl and the prince, right? This idea, right, that the girl has probably just reached puberty, and then she falls in love with the prince. There's some ambiguity around that as well. But in fairy tales, we don't really care about those barriers, because I think, from my perspective, when I read it, the reason why it's still appealing and not disgusting to me, and I don't think about the age aspect, is that I just think of the concept, the masculine and the feminine, more
How old
antiques of
was Snow
archetypes.
White in the original story?
I think it's really when reaches puberty, right? So it'd be what, 14 or something. I've
Sure.
read
I don't
mentioned.
know when people reach their
It
puberty.
varies probably.
Yeah,
I
I
don't
have
remember
no
when I
idea.
reached puberty. It's all a blur. Uh,
Yeah, I'd rather forget about my puberty than.
okay, but let me ask you something else about because I've enumerated a lot of motifs here. What do you make of the cannibalism part? The fact that the stepmother wants to is asking the hunter to bring the liver and the lungs back. What do you make of that?
Well, firstly, I think people were weird. Second is I think the idea, the motive behind eating someone else's organs is almost like symbolic of gaining their power, right? There's throughout history there's been stories about queens bathing in virgin blood to regain their youth. Then you have the classic Christian trope: eat my body, drink my blood, that sort of stuff.
Hmm. Well, there's obviously there's some populations in the world that just rely on meat alone, like the Eskimos, and the reason why they're able to sustain themselves is that we just like to eat certain parts of animals, but they eat the whole thing, and actually these internal organs tend to have some nutrients that the rest of the body don't have. Really, like some type of vitamins and so on, and that actually quite powerful and quite rich. And to your point, there's a lot of history, shamanistic history to some extent, around consuming organs and revitalization on that basis. And there's something so pagan about the story, right? In that sense, so animistic. It's really fascinating to think how this story have crystallized or synthesized along centuries until it was collected in the 1800s by these guys. I just find it
I
extremely
wonder
fascinating.
if you ask a cannibal to rank the organs and body parts that he likes the most from the best to the least, like where do lungs and livers actually rank? Like, is this a delicacy or some sort of like, is it just a random organ that they picked when they wrote the story?
Well, I know. I mean, I don't know about liver. I mean, I like foie gras. I like pâtés. I I like eating liver from time to time, and lungs quite unusual though. I've
Yeah,
tried
what is in
brain.
lungs?
There's nothing much, right? Because it's just alveoli. That's it's pretty empty if you exclude the air. I have tried pig's brain once, I have to say, as an omelet. It's kind of a
Hmm.
delicacy that I really, really like, but it's a handful. It's quite fat. What would you expect, that your brain is mostly fat? It didn't cross my mind, but that's anyway,
I have no idea.
or whatever it is. But let's talk about the end. So there's some very versions of this, right? Dropping a Snow White versus getting kissed. Some stories like the Disney one is a lot more PG. It excludes kind of the whole hunter scene, right? Or at least the attempted murder. And then there's vengeance at the end of it, right? There's one version of the story that actually where the stepmother gets punished for what happened. Do you know anything
Yeah,
about the
so
part?
they have the wedding ceremony, and the stepmom shows up, and obviously she gets a bit pissed because Snow White is still alive. How outrageous! And basically, the prince is sentencing her to death by putting red hot iron shoes on her feet and forcing her to dance. And I believe in the original story, they actually suspend the wedding ceremony until she dies. So they kind of take a break to see her death, see her execution, which makes it even weirder. Like, how do you continue your wedding ceremony after it, right? In terms of, yeah, that's the version I know. Is that the version you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's just I was reading this when I was a teenager, I think, or even earlier. I picked up this Grimm Brothers book, and it was just so interesting. I always thought, why is it called Grimm? Why are they called Grimm Brothers? It's one of the. It's basically reads like a horror story. Sometimes it has these gorish elements, and I wonder why these were preserved. My guess is
Yeah.
that there's a moral element to it, or a moral, and it makes it memorable, right? When you have these cruel punishments to bad deeds and so on, it really leaves a scar, right, in kids, and it reminds them, look, this is what happens if you talk to strangers. Open the stranger's door to a stranger. This is what happens if you do something bad. You get punished, and it's a capital offense to some extent. But it's
Your lungs
extreme.
get eaten.
Yeah, and it's all on the edge, right? And it's these stories that we have been reading to kids are just really amazingly graphic in a way that you just don't expose kids to anymore. You wouldn't necessarily, right? I don't know. Like, even the version that I have here a Romanian version of these two page is really watered down, and I'm kind of tempted to go back to the original source because there's some element of truth about reading the full story, including gruesome part, especially because you're not watching the grotesque, but you're enacting it, which may have kind of a cathartic element to it, like cleansing. Kids being exposed, like my daughter being exposed to that, is kind of fun because we always play rough and tumble play where I pretend to say eat her, like we do pushing and biting and stuff like that, which kids love. And they
Sure,
already play with
sure.
these shamanistic elements. They understand what eating someone's finger is and so on. And here's the story kind of enacting those things as you read through. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah, let's not share this podcast with child protection services. All right. Otherwise, yeah, feel free to do whatever.
Yeah, we'll get our working with children permits to make sure we're good. No, cool. Let's wrap up. So for me, it's just I I love this story so much, and I love it for several reasons. I'll give three reasons just to close off from my perspective. You don't see a lot of feminine rivalry these days, and feminine competition. So the aspect of feminine competition, feminine aggression, this is a very strong motif here. The other one is the motif of just being a parent and the sacrifices that you have to make, and how quickly something that is how nurture can quickly lead to hate. In a situation, whether it's because of your relationship with your partner or the sheer fact that you have to look after a child and it's a lot of resources that actually end up aging you. And maybe a third motif is that I really like, which gives a lot of closure to the story, is of course, and a lot of people don't like this part. The fact that there's just a prince in it. The prince rescues the girl. I love these sort of stories, and I like them because I something about because of something that I read or heard. I think, and you shouldn't think about these as necessarily guy saves girl, but more around. And this is more of a Jungian idea of the feminine being a feminine which lies unconscious sometimes, feminine being an expression of kind of nature, of sometimes passivity, beauty, but it's unstructured yet. It has an element of chaos, or it's latent potential to some extent. And then you need the masculine as a form of consciousness, as in you just need a bit of attention. You need to focus on the beauty. In this case, the prince focuses on Snow White, identifies her, and kind of resurrects her through the action of just paying attention, which I really love, just as a concept, because that's how you identify beauty from pure, from nothing and potential in everyday life. You focus your attention at it, and suddenly it emerges as something beautiful and reaches its full potential, even from the dead, so to speak. So I really like that. Any last thoughts from you? No.
I mean, I have plenty. Firstly, that I think I'll just read the watered down version of this story to my kids. I would avoid the eating your livers and lungs situation. The second is maybe just to add something what you said is I know at that time honor was a very central motif of a lot of stories. So I don't know
Mm.
how much of what the prince has done was out of honor, how much of it was out of love. I'm not sure, but I feel like there's definitely an aspect of maybe the prince just wanted to take her back to her kingdom to where she can be buried because obviously the prince thought that she's dead. And it wasn't about any intent to, you know, get down with it. So, yeah, that's it.
I mean, it was nice to just to talk about it and just throw some ideas around, what makes it still a classic, and what attracts our attention to it still. So it was great talking to you about it.
Yeah, it was great talking to you. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you next week.
See ya.